The Unforgettable Guinevere St. Clair by Amy McKechnie. Chapter 1. When I was 10, Gacy Cutter tried to kill me. It was just like her, too, always leaving a bad first impression. Her idea of a welcome wagon came in the middle of July during my first Iowa heat wave, which was as hot as you know what. My little sister Biddy and I were minding our own beeswax, walking past one corn row after another to get a good look at our new school and the playground's famed red rocket slide. I had my fingers crossed that it was totally wicked. We stayed off the main road, walking along the bank of the Crow River where it was cooler and somehow felt safer. I swear it was so flat here that with one little tilt, we would fall right off the world. "Hurry up, Biddy baby!" I could hear her behind me, dragging an old stick in the dirt, which was comforting in a Hansel and Gretel kind of way. Not that it was even possible to get lost here. We'd had a bet by the time we got to the rocket slide, we'd still be able to see Nana on the front porch, wagging her finger at us. Sludging forward past identical green stalks, I decided to hate corn. "Gwen!" Biddy moaned. "Come on, honey," I called over my shoulder, using the word honey like any sweet mothering sister would. I peeked back to see Biddy's painful red face dripping sweat down the side of her baby round cheeks. I collapsed on the one rock that had shade, motioning for Biddy to sit next to me. In New York, the only river we had lived near was the Hudson, where these people called the Mafia put their rivals' dead bodies. I had a sudden and lonely affection for it. Biddy collapsed next to me. "I want to go home. It's too hot here." It was hot in New York, too. "I don't want to live here." "We have to." "Because of Vienna?" Everything, really, was because of Vienna. I splashed water on Biddy's face, jumped up, and said, "Come on, we're almost to the slide." Our objective cheered us enough to wade through yet another giant cornfield to Landlark Lane, where the glorious rocket slide came into view. It was like a real rocket, solid, enormous, painted red with white wings and a long slide coming down to earth. The top was a brilliant blue tip headed straight for the sky. I didn't even have time to say, "Race ya!" before we were halfway there. And we would have made it, too, if it weren't for the boy. His presence stopped us short. He was facing away from us, awkwardly cutting a large green bush into nothing but sticks, using the largest pair of scissors I had ever seen. Dressed in frayed, cut-off short jeans and a black t-shirt, he balanced barefoot on a skateboard. The backdrop to this butchery was an enormously grand farmhouse the color of clementine. Crudely nailed to a porch slat was a warped piece of driftwood with "Cutter" carved into it. The boy made a large, impatient whacking gesture at the bush, chopping off the entire top. "Ah, heck," he spit. "She's not gonna like that." "I've never seen anything like it," Biddy said solemnly. He turned quickly, surprised, but as soon as he saw us, his face became one wide, crooked grin. He tucked the scissors, which looked large enough to decapitate me in one quick whack, behind the bush. Cool as a cat, he flipped his skateboard up with his bare foot to walk toward us. The underside of his board was a cluster of black and white skulls. "Pruning shears," he said, following my gaze. "Had to hide 'em." He lowered his voice and raised his eyebrows. "Don't want those to get in the wrong hands." I couldn't tell, was he teasing or trying to scare me? Despite my questions, I let Biddy pull me down the street. An interrogation would have to wait. We had a rocket slide to climb. The boy wasn't done with us. "What's this?" I heard the skateboard coming from behind before it passed, headed toward a homemade plywood ramp, sitting in the middle of the road. He pushed off the ground with his bare foot. Crouching like a tiger on the approach, he attacked and flew The wind carried him high into the air as he glided through space, his board flying with him, touching nothing but sky. He landed as neatly as he had begun, in the same crouched tiger position. "Holy tamale," Biddy whispered. I briefly considered marrying him. "Have you ever crashed?" I eyed his bruised knees and slightly swollen cheek. He shrugged, flicking his long dark hair out of his eyes. "I was born lucky. Gacy always says." He yawned like it was nothing to be lucky. Gacy? It was a familiar name, one I'd heard my father use, but I couldn't remember why. "Yep, I'm cutting a wreath for the funeral." He motioned back toward the Clementine orange house. "She died?" "No." "Okay," I said, confused. "Well, I'm Gwen." "I know," he said, waving us off. "Everyone knows you were coming." "What's your name?" "Jimmy." "Want to see my tattoo?" Biddy and I looked at each other. Iowa was supposed to be Little House on the Prairie and braids. There were not supposed to be tattoos in Iowa. "Shoot, I'm just messing with ya," he said. I nodded, slowly sizing him up. "Want a race?" I asked. "I can run a 6-minute flat mile. I was the fastest girl in New York." He raised an eyebrow. "It ain't bragging if you can do it," I added, figuring "ain't" was a good Iowa word. From behind us, a door slammed, letting him off the hook. "That's Micah," Jimmy said. "You could say he lost his best friend today. Well, except for me." Jimmy skated toward the smaller boy sitting on the front steps. Biddy and I took a few steps forward. At first glance, you could tell the farmhouse had once been impressive, with large wraparound porch, storybook turns and curves, and a small tower I'd like to read 100 books in. But the closer we got, the more foreboding it became. The house was actually falling apart. The rusted black mailbox was secured only with faded blue duct tape. The orange house paint was peeling. The front porch was bowed. The gutters were broken or missing. Not to mention, distracting from any sort of charm, were clashing fluorescent "No trespassing" and "Beware of dog" signs nailed to the massive maple trees out front. Who, I wondered, were they trying to keep out? Jimmy, who was the first human we'd seen in a mile. "Rapunzel," Biddy whispered, looking up at the small tower. The boy Micah kept his head down as we approached. He was real skinny and his white hair was almost completely buzzed. His legs were pale, chicken-like, sticking out of bright pink shorts, and never before had I seen a boy wear sparkling silver curly shoelaces. I instantly adored him. "Hi, Micah," Jimmy called, ollieing over a small troll statue. "Look who I found." Micah looked up, his teary eyes magnified behind thick brown eyeglasses. He stood and wiped his nose. "Hi, you can come too. She's waiting." Jimmy followed Micah toward the backyard. "Who's waiting? Where are we going?" I called out. "To bury Jose," Jimmy said. Far too curious to leap now, I pulled Biddy along. "Come on," I whispered. "There might be snacks." Whoever lived in the Clementine house was far more interested in flowers than paint and gutters. The backyard looked like a New York City art exhibit with splashes of pink, purple, yellow flowers everywhere. The sunflowers, not quite opened, nodded and beckoned us forward. "Vienna would love these," I murmured with a slight pang, stopping to inhale a black-eyed Susan. I was so engulfed that I barely noticed a loud honking noise off in the distance. "Beware," Micah said, looking around, "of the goose." "Excuse me." "Actually," Jimmy cackled, "Gacy is who you need to watch out for." "But who is Gacy?" This actually was the question I would forever be asking. Jimmy smiled wickedly over his shoulder, then motioned to a long wooden box that sat against the house. "Gacy's coffin," he said, "commissioned last month. 'Cause she can't fit in a regular one. I raised my eyebrows. Just in case things happen. Huh? Went the goose. Jimmy motioned me forward. Far out in the field was a man moving slowly on a blue tractor. I wiped the sweat from my forehead. My watch read 8:42 a.m. It's so hot, I breathed. Heck of a hot spell, an enunciated voice said behind me, which is why morning burials are preferable to afternoon burials. I jumped as Biddy clung to my backside. A giant woman had materialized from nowhere. She was enormously tall, as if she had dinosaur bones. Her muscles were large on top but sagged on the bottom like there was too much person to fill. Following close behind her was a beautiful white goose. I stepped forward to pet it, but the goose let out a terrifying "Ah!" Stay, said the giant woman, giving me a fierce look. Then she turned to the goose, revealing an ugly purple scar on her hairline to her chin. Shoo! The goose obeyed, but not before aggressively flapping its large wide wings at me. Tula, the fighting goose, is all talk and no action today, the giant mocked. She turned back towards me, raising her chin, sizing me up. I recoiled. Hard, wrinkled lines ran down her face like dried-out riverbeds. Her hair was pulled back in a coarse gray braid. In her arms, she held a big, black garbage bag. I swallowed hard. Was Jose in there? It's the people from New York, Jimmy said. I can see that, she said, nodding. How marvelous to finally meet Guinevere St. Clair. You'll look like your father. I'm Gacy Cutter. My instincts told me to run. My father said people would know us. He said he and Vienna had grown up in Crow after all, and everyone knew everyone. But I didn't like how this Gacy Cutter said my name, like she knew more about me than I did. A large drop of sweat hung precariously from her upper lip, and I licked my own lips as well, hitting the bag with an audible smack. Biddy decided to make her appearance by peeking out from behind me. Gacy, startled, staggered sideways, the black garbage bag tilting toward me. I felt a great chill hit the center of my chest as a tiny sliver of black hair slipped out from under the plastic. Gacy stared at Biddy, looking like she was seeing a ghost. Well, she whispered, aren't you the spitting image? It was true. I knew from pictures that Biddy was our mother, Vienna, many, many years ago. I impatiently took Biddy's fingers out of her mouth. She ducked behind me once more. Does she talk? Gacy said, delighted. Yes, I said indignantly. Wonderful. So our adventure begins. Now, without further dilatoriousness, shovels? I hesitated, holding my sister back. There were clearly no snacks. We should have never deviated from our rocket slide plan. But Micah and Jimmy followed Gacy toward the cornfields next to the river. Georgia Pyle, New York prosecuting attorney, and my father's dental patient knew I wanted to be a lawyer more than anything. She had given me a gift when we left New York. The law, A to Z. Accessory was letter A. Somebody who aids somebody else to commit a crime or avoid arrest, but does not participate in the crime itself. This woman was holding a dead body and walking off into a cornfield, and I was letting her. Could it be a crime? The thought was both terrible and thrilling. I was only 10 and about to become an accessory. Was it possible to be disbarred before I even got into law school? Alas, curiosity has always been my weakness, and 10 seconds later, we too were marching in the funeral procession, mourning Jose. We stopped abruptly while Gacy adjusted the weight in her arms. This is a solemn occasion for the Cutter family and Jimmy Quintal, who, for all intents and purposes, is a Cutter. She breathed heavily. An important member of the family has passed on through the great veil that separates us from the heavenly beings. Micah kicked a rock. Gacy fixed her eyes fiercely on him. We've got to channel the Lord, boy. We got to talk to him, let the Spirit move you. She inhaled deeply and closed her eyes. I watched in fascination, having no experience with watching someone channel the Lord before. Jimmy smirked, his eyes shut tightly except for a slit to watch me. I bowed my head and nudged Biddy to do the same. Slowly and deliberately, Gacy's voice became a low-pitched force. Lord, death comes to us all. It comes to us all, and we thank thee for the life thou gives us, either big or small. Gacy hefted the bag high in the air like an Amazon warrior. We offer thy faithful servant unto thee, commanding your spirit into your keep, and we ask your great and magnificent, magnanimous mercy on thy servant, that he did the best he could with the body he was given. And Lord, her voice suddenly broke. I peeked under my eyelids, grudgingly delighted by such a performance. Did she say servant? Were they burying their servant in the backyard? Lord, she cried, Jose was well loved. Yes, he was. Hallelujah. Gacy nodded, wiping her nose on her shoulder, grunted like a pig, though hygiene and breath had much to be desired. Amen. Opening her eyes, she looked around the small circle. Final thoughts and tributes. Dude, Jimmy said, remember that time he ate that nasty baby diaper? What? I interrupted. Baby diapers? Speculation on Jimmy's part, Gacy said. My palms were now noticeably damp. My feet stuck like concrete to the ground. Questions peppered my brain. Baby diapers, a servant, a secret backyard burial. They didn't look like the kind of people who had servants. Why couldn't Jose be buried in a normal cemetery? Then again, I was new to town. Maybe this was an Iowa thing? Heavy, Gacy groaned, lowering the bag. It thudded, dead weight on the ground. She clapped her large hands together and looked at us expectantly. 6 feet is ideal. With only 2 shovels, we took turns and were immediately drenched with perspiration. How far is 6 feet? I panted. About as tall as I am. My eyes went from Gacy's knees to her bulging waistline to her broad shoulders and finally up to her face. We'd be digging till next week. As if she could read my mind, she responded saltily by saying, but 3 will suffice. I said, how did Jose die? In his sleep, Gacy said. It was his time. He was suffering. Somewhat mollified, I dug my shovel into the hole, the long handle awkward in my skinny arms. Then again, he could have been poisoned, Gacy said. He was always eating something out of the trash. That diaper, Jimmy began. Enough, Gacy said. She tapped the side of her head, close to the long scar. Jose wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he was a faithful companion to his family. She took the shovel from Micah and launched a huge chunk of earth over her shoulder with such force that I startled and fell over. How is your mother, Guinevere St. Clair? Fine, I said, struggling to get up. I'm going to bring her some of my flowers. She always loved my flowers. Yes, I said, frowning at my dirt-covered clothes. Nana was going to have a hissy fit. Fiona loves flowers, but I'm sure she's different than when you knew her. Well, we're all different than we were. Thank goodness for that. No, I thought, in Vienna's case. Micah mumbled something, his face a mess of dirt rivulets that kept sliding his glasses down his nose while his dirty fingers kept pushing them back up. Enunciate so I can hear you, Gacy said. I need a drink. Gacy bowed. Micah and Jimmy walked back toward the house, leaving Biddy and me with the giant woman and a corpse. Micah's having a hard time, Gacy said. Very much like his father, sensitive and weak. I'm afraid for him. This world has a way of crushing the sweet and soft. I glanced out into the fields at the man on the blue tractor. No, that's Wilbur, the old boy. You'll meet him and his mistress soon enough. A mistress? In Iowa? Micah's father is dead, cremated, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Gacy surveyed the field. He's buried here, too. But cremation is expensive, and as much as I loved Jose, well, some men you have more of an affection for. Biddy, who was too small to dig, took a tentative step toward a tree swing, looking to me for permission. I nodded. I can see you take care of her, Gacy said, heaving another large shovel of dirt over her shoulder. You both lost your mother at too young an age. No, I corrected. We didn't lose her. There's more than one way to lose somebody. Gacy sniffed, her t-shirt drenched with perspiration and clinging to her lumpy body. That's probably deep enough. Why don't you get right in there and see? I pretended I hadn't heard, craning my neck for the wretched boys who'd left me to bury their own servant. There's no sign of them. My mood blackened. I'm too big, Gacy added. I glanced at Biddy swinging happily. Next door was a small white house I hadn't noticed until now, and the goose sat on the back porch, occasionally honking. A curtain fluttered before a hanging sill still. A witness. Well, I guess. I dropped my shovel in the hole and jumped down after it. It was cooler in the ground, an almost welcome relief from the humidity. The hole wasn't 6 feet, but it was deeper than I expected, and when I put my hand on the ledge, the earth crumbled down my arms and into my shoes. Immediately, a helpless feeling rose inside my chest, then all the way up to my hairline. Biddy! I yelled. Are you frightened? Gacy asked. She sounded surprised. I tried to breathe in and out, to not lose control of my imagination, as my father frequently suggested I did. I tried to hear him talking to me. Use your brain and control your emotions, Guinevere. I jumped up to climb out, but my attempt only brought more dirt down. I could see nothing except for Gacy's looming face. Her teeth suddenly looked like yellowed fangs. My hands began to shake. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My hands were clammy, almost numb. And then Gacy began to unwrap the bag. Was she gonna put that thing in the grave with me? I'd be buried alive. I pressed my eyes shut, my breathing becoming shorter. Guinevere, act! I forced my face upward. Gacy had stopped unwrapping and was looking down at me, a curious look on her face, almost as if she was amused by my last moment of life. I could see the body poking out of the bag. Black hair, thick, unruly, snarled black hair, matted and wet. The smell of fresh death. My voice came. I screamed, while Gacy hovered above, ready to bury me alive and top me off with the dead servant. My screams gave me the adrenaline to lunge upward, clawing savagely with my fingernails as the cold dirt poured down my neck and under my clothes. I hung on the ledge as Gacy got down on her hands and knees. Help! Help! I whispered. Guinevere, she said, you don't need my help. I fell back in the grave. Dirt fell on my cheeks, and microscopic dust entered my eyes and nose, making me cough. The moment of my life flashed before me. Vienna teaching me to play patty cake, my father's smile, and Biddy. I have to say Biddy before Gacy turns on her next. With an unknown strength, I jumped and grabbed the grass above me. Using my feet and knees, I pulled myself up and away from the devil woman. If she tried to touch me, I would have bitten her hand off. And blessed Biddy, she was running toward me, Micah and Jimmy close behind. What's the matter? Micah asked out of breath. Worthless! I screamed. They looked at one another, baffled by my outburst, and then Gacy did the oddest thing. She clapped, delighted. Grabbing Biddy's hand, we ran the entire mile back home on the dirt road of Landmark Lane, not stopping until we were panting and crying on Nana's front porch behind the prim white picket fence. We will never, ever go back there, Biddy. Never! We didn't see my school or the rocket slide, she wailed. Biddy, hush now. I'll take you tomorrow. We lay back, looking at the light blue Iowa sky. We'll never go back, was the phrase I uttered over and over. We'll never go back. That wicked Gacy Cutter was right about one thing. I didn't need her help, nor would I ever ask for it, not as long as I lived and breathed. We lay on the grass until Nana called us in for lunch. By that time, my mood had decidedly changed for the better for 2 reasons. 1, I had always longed for an arch enemy. And 2, I was certain I'd just beaten my New York 6-minute flat mile record.